Hey there, you fine science students. Mr. Mechnick here for a little podcast on classification of matter. So as we've been investigating in science class, we've been learning a lot about matter and different forms that it can exist in, and we've been using different types of models to represent what matter looks like at the atomic level or at the molecular level or even at the mixture level. So as we just kind of go back and look at, we know that all matter is made up of the simplest particles called atoms. And so the atom is the foundation for all types of matter. And when we classify matter into categories, we can basically classify them into one or two groups: substances or mixtures. Very often we call a substance a pure substance because it can't be broken down into anything simpler. Mixtures, on the other hand, can be classified based upon how the molecules or the compounds are arranged in that mixture. So one of the things about mixtures that you should know is that mixtures can be separated simply by physical means. We will spend a lot of time in class learning about how we can separate mixtures. There's a lot of different techniques and strategies that we can use to separate mixtures. On the other hand, if we wanted to look at elements and compounds, the atoms that make up a compound like H2O or NaCl, they can't be separated physically. We can chemically separate them, but they can't physically be separated. So that's a major difference between pure substances and mixtures. So going back to our pure substances, we can classify them into two categories: pure elements or into chemical compounds. Those are our two categories of pure substances. Mixtures can be grouped into homogeneous mixtures or heterogeneous mixtures. So we will spend some time in this presentation making sure you understand some of the basics of how we classify matter. So again, the simplest, most distinct part of all matter is the atom. This should not be new to you. You should be very familiar with the structure of the atom. So the other types of pure substances are elements, and elements consist of only one kind of atom. They can't be broken down into anything simpler. So that's why we call them physical pure substances. When you have a pure substance and you broke it down into a smaller piece, you still have that pure substance. You still have that element. So chemical compounds, on the other hand, contain two or more different types of elements bonded together. So they're chemically bonded together. And one of the things that we have learned is that the difference between a compound and a molecule. So again, making sure we're clear that a compound is a combination of two or more different atoms bonded together, and a molecule is the same two types of atoms bonded together. And these can be broken down into simpler types of elements by chemical means, but not by physical means. So if we wanted to break apart these substances, these compounds, we would have to actually use some chemistry to do that. And when they combine different atoms together, the properties of this compound is different than the properties of each individual atom. So if we look at the other type of matter, we're looking at mixtures. So mixtures are heterogeneous or homogeneous. Hetero simply means different. So when you have a mixture of different substances, different compounds, different elements mixed together, and they're not equally combined, then we call it a heterogeneous mixture. All mixtures can be separated by physical means. So if I ask you to separate all of the tree nuts from the M&Ms and the raisins, you could easily do that. You could physically grab them and eat all the M&Ms and the raisins and leave the nuts behind. If you were asked to separate a mixture that's in a solution, it becomes a little bit more tricky because you can't use your fingers to do that, but there are physical means that we could actually use to remove the solute from this solution. So when we have a solution, We can also look at a heterogeneous solution that we call a suspension. And a suspension simply is when you have this solution and the large particles settle out. So I always like to think of Italian dressing, all of the Italian seasoning. If this is left to sit in your refrigerator for a few hours, all of the particles settle out at the bottom. So when you have a solution and the particles settle out, or they are suspended in that solution, then we know we have a heterogeneous suspension. You cannot have a homogeneous suspension. So when we did our river testing and we tested for turbidity, we were testing for suspended particles in the water column. If you have a homogeneous mixture, it means the particles that make up that solution are evenly mixed throughout. So tap water, it would be considered a homogeneous mixture. There's an equal distribution of all of the particles that's in drinking water. If you have milk, milk is a good example of a homogeneous mixture. Milk is actually homogenized, so all of the fats and the lactose sugar that's in there and all the protein that's in milk, it's equally distributed. So every single swallow of milk you take is the same. That's not different. It's the same throughout. The particles are evenly distributed. And we could separate this by physical means. So if we did want to separate the lipids or the fats from the protein, there are ways that we could actually do that. So we've been learning a lot about solutions. So a solution is a homogeneous mixture with a solute equally dissolved in that solvent. So again, the solvent is what we put the solute into to create a solution. So solutions can fall into the category of being in a suspension, or they can be in the form of a homogeneous solution. So one form of a homogeneous solution where you have large particles that are suspended within the solution is called a colloid. So one way to think of a colloid, if you were to shine light through it, that these big particles, they don't settle out, but the big particles would actually scatter light. So that's an example of a colloid. Milk, a foggy morning, the fog is an example of a colloid. Shaving cream is a good example of a colloid. So it's a homogeneous mixture with particles that are really too big and they block or scatter light when light is shined through it. So these are the different types of matter that you guys should be familiar with. We'll be doing an activity in class where we will test you on classifying matter into these different categories. So please make sure you have some of this recorded in your notes and be ready to do some matter classification in class next time we're together.